Thank you for setting that up. Only in Vegas, right? 50 people show up Wednesday morning to hear more about cognitive architecture. So thank you for coming in. Over the next hour, me and a couple of my colleagues are going to walk you through some work that we've done that we think is relevant. It's going to be very appropriate to where we think most industry folks are in terms of their own journey with generative AI. So I'm going to kick it off. My name is Naveen Sharma. I run our data analytics and AI business at Cognizant. Been with the firm for about 15 years, been in consulting for a lot longer. I'm going to hand it over to my friend Phil. Phil is the CTO for one of our Cognizant acquisitions, a firm called Innovate that focuses purely on AWS and generative AI. So a very, very narrow definition by design, because we think there's so much to do in the AWS stack that we needed that specialization. Phil's going to talk a little bit about the architectural approaches we have for deploying this, and then we're going to make it even more real. We'll have Nick come up. Nick's going to talk to you about how Williams-Lee has deployed generative AI within their environment and how they're taking it out to their clients and consumers. So that's the plan. We're going to try and keep this fast-paced and moving. If there's questions, we will try and take those in the end. But if we run out of time, please come find one of us outside or at the Cognizant booth, and we'd be happy to engage and answer questions. So the agenda is going to look like this. We'll start off by talking about what is it that we're doing in generative AI. What do we think the opportunities and challenges are? What are the cognitive architectures? And I'll spend a little bit of time just setting that up before Phil gets in terms of how we do this, the method for deploying this, and then the last piece, like I said, we're going to make it real, right? So how has Williams-Lee deployed this for their clients? Very, very quickly. Does anyone know when ChatGPT was launched? The date? November 30th, 2022. Tomorrow would be the one-year anniversary. I have yet to see tech that has taken off at this pace, at this speed. You all, if you were in the Gen AI, the keynote this morning, you heard all of the focus, all of the energy, all the new developments that AWS has put into expanding their platforms, the capabilities with SageMaker and Bedrock, and all of the other associated assets that are being enhanced. We've done the same thing internally. Now, we're not a software company, we're a services company. For a services company, it's important that we don't show up to our clients and say, so what would you like us to do today? It's always important that we show up with a perspective on where do we think the space of generative AI is going. To do that, we made a very deliberate move to not define the strategy top-down. Instead, we went to our associates. So all 350,000 of them, we opened this up to them and said, what do you folks think are ideas where generative AI can be used to make an impact in Cognizant's business, but also more importantly in our clients' business? They came up with about 35,000 ideas. We narrowed that down to about 3,200 that were purely focused on generative AI. And I'll tell you that we went through every single one of them. We actually called out the top 20, and we built them out and took them to clients to get real-world feedback and information back from them. So that's one of the things that we started to do because we didn't want to show up uninformed. It was very grounds-driven. 2, the slide's actually gotten a little bit older already. The second bullet on the right, we realized clients want to come in and engage and experiment and also learn from the work that's been done in this space. So we've actually launched a network of studios, AI studios, where clients come in, we show them the work that's been done, we help them get started with the art of the possible, and then very quickly, right, in a day and a half, we help them build out that plan, POCs, the data is ready, and then you take it out and say, we're going to roll it out to the enterprise, make it a little bit more real. So that's the approach that we've taken. You can see some of the numbers in terms of the projects that we're executing. The demand has been phenomenal. I think there's not a single industry where we don't have conversations happening on how do we make Gen AI real in our business. The answer to that is this slide. There we go. Oh, wrong button. There we go. So we've taken 3 approaches to it, or 3-phase approach to it. The first is you cannot do good or meaningful generative AI unless your underlying data platforms are in good shape. You heard Swami talk about that this morning, right? The underlying data foundation, the quality of the data, the ability and the speed with which data can be read and written, and the information that you have about that data asset is critical. So first, making sure that the data platforms are ready. If you've already done that, that's wonderful. We then move you on to the second stage. The slide says create models. We're not showing up and saying, you should build your own LLMs. Look, there may be an edge case or two where you want to build your own LLM, that's fine. For the most part, though, What we've seen is clients are able to look at a variety of LLMs that are available, foundational models, third-party models, open source, pick and choose the right model and the approach to meet your end result. Sometimes using a vanilla model as is works. Other times you go in and fine-tune the model. One of the things we're doing in our own healthcare business is we're taking a model that's been trained on medical data and we're fine-tuning it to build out 4 use cases. So we think that's another approach that can be deployed. Other times it's just simple prompt engineering that gets you to that end state. So depending on what it is that you're trying to solve for, the complexity of the problem, the approach that we take changes. So that's the second part of the motion, right? Picking and choosing the right model architectures. And then the third thing that companies sometimes forget in the excitement is these things are wonderful science experiments, but business value is realized only when you deploy it within the business process. Sometimes it's important to start at both ends of this, right? So don't spend too much energy in preparing the platform. Don't zip through that either. But at the same time, do not forget about the business value realization. It's very easy to do a science project where you show up in 4 weeks and show them something that looks fancy, and the business scratches their head and goes, why would I ever want to do that? So keep that in mind as you run through your journey. You saw how we spoke about those several hundred projects we've delivered. Some common themes stand out. The themes that we're putting them up on the slide. I'm not going to read them all out to you, but this will make sense when Phil comes out. You see all of the text on there in terms of capabilities and limitations. We stepped back and we said, what are the common themes that we're seeing when clients are actually going out and deploying these use cases? So we've called out what we think are common cognitive architectures. It's not the easiest thing to roll off the tongue, but it makes a ton of sense when we show you what it looks like. What are these patterns that you can start to build out within your enterprise so that every time you deploy a use case, you're not building it from the scratch? If you've already done text summarization, then something that takes that to the next step and composes writings is a meaningful and easy iterative next step. So we'll show you what those common patterns look like. The intent is to make sure you don't rebuild from zero every single time. You've got the base framework laid out and you're just executing on those patterns. So keep that in mind. One other thing that we see with clients is the need to be smart about this. Look, this is, like I said, right, the technology is less than a year old, 364 days in common usage. But the underlying tech has been out there for 5 or 6 years. That first white paper that described, I think it was titled Knowledge is All You Need, or something like that, came out in 2017. So the tech has been around for a while, but the tech just didn't have the exposure. And one of the things that happened because the exposure was limited was that industry and folks like you and us didn't get the time or the focus to actually evaluate the risks of it. So this is something that we think is important. We help, on the right side, we help with those cognitive architectures. We can help you be a little bit more transparent and explainable. You saw, again, Swami speak this morning about making sure that there's no copyright violations, right? There's traceability back to where things come from when you're writing code, making sure code that you're putting into your system isn't copyrighted by someone else, and then opening you up to risk. So those are the kinds of things that we've done some work on. We'll show you what that looks like. To the left, the bottom left, is where you see ethics and regulation and economic and social impact. That's an ever-changing space. About a month ago, the US released its guidelines on the fair use of AI. The UK's done some tremendous work in leading up to that as well with their AI summit. But that's an ever-changing space. This is one that I think companies are not spending enough energy on. I can absolutely see some firm of lawyers somewhere gathering together to launch a service that keeps their clients posted on the latest and greatest regulation. So these are all the things that you need to think about. But like I said, I'm going to now take it a level deeper. I'm going to call on my colleague Phil to come up, and he's going to talk about these cognitive architectures, these patterns that we have. Phil?
Thank you, Naveen. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to talk about some of the kind of architectural patterns and use cases and things. So we generally see it helping across quite a broad range of industries, as Naveen said, but it distills into one or two kind of areas of use. So one is automation of processes and taking in things like documents and processing them quicker and getting them available. One is helping developers be more efficient when it comes to creating code, and you saw a lot about Code Whisper in the last few days. And one's around customer experience, so we're particularly seeing a lot in things like email triage, that kind of thing, processing, understanding emails coming into a business, where they need to be routed, and what SME needs to deal with them. And then lastly, it's kind of enterprise knowledge and understanding all the data and where it may sit within your organisation, and being able to ask questions of that. Worldwide, we're seeing about 150 client engagements in Gen AI and up to 400 unique concepts, but it's still broadly down into these main areas. So, to deliver generative AI on Amazon, we generally look at kind of two services. So the first one is Bedrock, and you all heard about Bedrock today. So that makes available to you a number of foundational models. We've generally used most of them. Kind of the one we kind of navigate is to Claude mostly, but generally we've used all the models. And then there's also the SageMaker option. So when we look at these in real life, when we actually deploy them in production, we're kind of looking at a few aspects of which model to deploy and how to deploy it. So if you're going down the Bedrock route, Bedrock is a pay per token service, so you only pay for the prompts that you put through it. While SageMaker is a per hour of GPU kind of thing. So today they kind of announced Llama 2 70 million parameter being available actually on Bedrock. If you're doing that on SageMaker, that costs you about $150,000 a year to run. So the price point is significant. But the flip side of SageMaker is also has its Hugging Face integration. So that also gives you a lot wider models that you can choose from. So you can choose from Flan, Falcon, other kind of open source models through that connection. And you can dive deeper, and you can do a lot more in terms of alignment and refining those models when it's inside SageMaker, but it comes to that extra cost. So this is what kind of our architecture looks like. What we did was brought together kind of the best of breeds of two kind of elements of Cognizant to form this architecture, and we also based it on real-world examples. Okay, so as mentioned, I'm from one of our specialist units in Wisdom. We had existing architecture called RAMP, so that allows us to set up all the AWS environment securely for machine learning workloads. Then we brought in the Cognizant architecture for Gen AI to form this one overall pattern. I'd like to focus on a few things about this and kind of address the main thing that we tried to address in this architecture is privacy, okay, and control over where your data is going and where it's stored. So you'll see a couple of data stores in this architecture. So we've got S3 in there to store any documents securely with encryption, so that's encrypted at rest. We have also a couple other things. So you have a choice of vector databases, but in this architecture, we've generally gone for PG vector. But again, we've deployed RDS inside a private network here. We've made sure the encryption is turned on so that, again, we know that your vector is securely deployed inside your network. The interesting one to add to kind of the general architecture is, and we saw a little bit of it today, but is Amazon DynamoDB. You can swap it out from MongoDB and document DB, the Amazon managed service. What we're doing there is two things generally. One is to store conversation history. So when you're building these kind of architectures, one of the most compelling things from the end user point of view is it remembering what you've spoken about previously to these models and feeding that back into the conversation. So you ask it, for example, and when I've played with Claude, for example, ask it who is JFK, and it will turn back who JFK was, and then it's that next thing, it's like, well, who was his wife? And then it'll come up with Jacqueline Kennedy back. So it's that remembering. So we use a lot of that inside DynamoDB to store the conversation history. And the other thing we do there, and this is the thing I encourage anybody really getting, if you're going to play, is the real skill is the art of the prompt, but also being able to change that prompt based on real world kind of examples coming through, be able to tune it real time. So in that situation, what we've done is stored those into DynamoDB, so we can pull those prompts back, we can add new prompts into the chain of events so that it allows us to kind of manage those things. The other thing we've done from a security point of view in this architecture is that you'll see endpoints everywhere, okay? Particularly to Bedrock and to SageMaker. What that means from an enterprise corporate level is that your data doesn't leave your network estate. Okay, so if you're going to call somebody services without that, you'd call them over the internet basically. With Amazon, Bedrock, and using the endpoints, what you're doing is communicating from your network, your VPC, out to Bedrock via the private backbone of Amazon. Okay, so that means you've got control where that data is going. Also, how Amazon have deployed Bedrock is that you get an escrowed copy of the model, basically your own copy of the model. So that means that your data is only going to be used by that copy, and that only exists for you, and they don't retain that for any fine-tuning or anything on their part later. It is solely for your purpose. They won't retrain the model on that, so you've got complete control over it not getting, not the original foundation model not getting your data. That gives you that reassurance around where your data will go up. The other thing I would say in all of this is the user experience is key, and the most compelling experiences is where you've really thought about the end user and how to interact with them. And then, so what we do with this architecture is then we deploy the Cognizant architecture in the middle to allow us to connect some of those to perform use cases, and I'll go through what those are in a second. But we're kind of running that in Lambda and EC2, Fargate, depending on the nature of that. The one thing I would say, if you look at Bedrock versus SageMaker, is again, SageMaker will sit within your network. You have a deployed instance inside your network, whilst Bedrock is escrowed outside your network, but you're communicating it privately. So if you want that ultimate control that's really inside your network, then SageMaker is your choice, but that security privacy constraint comes at the cost of the per hour thing. So what we try to do is put all these building blocks together to allow you to choose where to go. So one of the use cases we've built with that is the knowledge navigator. Okay, so this is that ability. It's your own private ChatGPT, as it were, on your private documents, your private data. But you can be rest assured, due to all the security and privacy controls we put in the overall architecture, that your documents and everything are constrained to your privately to your real estate. So it just allows you to ask questions for those documents. We've seen that across a number of industries. So we've seen it in cap markets where there's lots of regulation documents to process. We've seen it in some legal document cases. Nick will speak through some of this in a little bit more when he comes on in a few moments. We're also seeing that in the insurance industry, that kind of thing, be able to query and ask questions of policy documents and that kind of thing. So it's quite a vast applicability for these things. And of course, you can do RAG with it, so you can ask. So part of that conversation is, and we've seen it. Example we saw in this situation again was engineers, lift engineers, and they've got thousands of manuals for different lifts and different parts and different lifts. So we built a use case where they could ask a question. It would understand the diagnosis of the fault, and then go and look up the appropriate part in the manual, and then come back with how to fix it. Where RAG can also help in that situation is, if you need a part, it can say, okay, is the part available at the depot, or what it would take to order it. So the engineer on their device can have a manual of how to fit it, know where to get the part from, and the diagnosis of what the fault was. So that's a kind of a good example. But again, we've really concentrated on the security and the privacy side of this architecture. So how it works. So, and you'd have seen this a couple of times probably in some of the keynotes actually. It's all about embeddings and vector databases when it comes to these kind of things. So the first stage is a prep stage where you take your documents in whatever format they are, and they typically can be docx, they could be PDF, for example, and you extract the content of that document. Typically how we do that is we'll go to the textract, and that will extract those pages from that document. There may be some pre-processing needed to get the document into the correct format, but that's how we'll extract it. Once we've extracted it, then we're going to send it through the embeddings. And basically what the embedding process does is take that text, and it was very much in the keynote this morning, we'll transfer that to vectors, numbers basically, what the machines and the models understand. And basically that's a kind of a 3D array. When I say 3D, it's actually n-degree array of vectors and the relationship between the words. So the embeddings create those vectors, and then what you need to do is store them into a knowledge database. So that's where you can use Pinecone. An example I showed previously, it's in PG Vector. There's other ones announced this morning where you can store it, but you're storing basically your private documents in there. And the thing to store alongside them is the extracted text. So you can search for that text, bring it back and know where it's done, and then also a reference to the original documents. That allows you to ground that answer of knowing kind of where that answer came from. So that's all part of that document store. And then basically you build a user interface to be able to query that, and then you're using another model. In this example, we're using Claude to have that conversation with the individual and track the conversation, use the conversation database. And then once it's understood that, it will then go and ask from the vector database, can you find me all relevant things that match this vector? And then it will pull that back and give the conversation response, or it will go to RAG and add RAG as needed. So the next evolution of this, and it's quite, we spotted this very early at Cognizant, and in the wisdom that this is going to be a killer use case, was the generative BI use case. And you saw this morning with Amazon Q in QuickSight, that this is another way of doing it. You saw also, I think it was Redshift this morning as well in QuickSight. Sorry, Redshift for this kind of thing. It's where, okay, we're done with documents, but there's also a lot of structured data in businesses in these data lakes. And I think the lady in the keynote spoke through quite elegantly. It was the last frontier, the last barrier for the business to be able to get insights was the fact that they'd have to kind of work with a BI tool and understand how to wrangle that BI tool to get answers to their questions in the data that's contained within their house or their different various data lakes. So in this architecture, basically what we're doing is using the meta catalog of the data lake and then asking questions, and it goes and using that meta catalog, it understands it. So again, we're using at this point a UI to do the questions and handle that conversation, and that will put it to another model. But what we're doing in this situation is we're putting inside the context all of that meta information from the GUI catalog so that we can ask it where the sales data is available. But that can query any number of data sources in theory. It can call Redshift, it can call S3, and so forth. And then once it's pulled that back, it will generate the content and return the result back to the user. So in terms of architecture, this is what it looks like. Those steps that I talked about, it's that UI going through that model, understanding the question, then once you understand the question, using the meta to understand how to fulfill the answer, and then running the query, so it creates this SQL at that point, then runs the SQL on the data store, and then pulls that back, and then uses another instance of the model to kind of turn that into something that a human would understand. So it's very technical how we do it. The thing that particularly Wisdom has prided itself on is taking people on the journey. Okay, the technology is only part of the journey. The journey is about maturing a business, enabling that business to understand the potential there, and then how they can take that enablement, come up with ideas, and then turn those ideas into realities. So we do this through the following kind of methodology, is that we can go into a business and we'll go through what GenAI is, the potential use cases, and run that enablement, and that can be at all levels of the business, from the board all the way down to individual engineers. But the idea is that what we're going to do is create that awareness so that when we get all those creative juices flowing for the next stage, okay? And the next stage is ideation. So coming up with all the use cases in the business that maybe where generative AI could be used. And to be honest, the broader the business, the better. And because everybody's going to, there's not a bad idea, you know, any idea is a good idea. So it's about surfacing those ideas. And it may be that along you've had that enablement, but it's somebody who's non-technical that comes up with the ideas. So you want to funnel all those ideas from all those people and work out the best ideas and the ones that really can make the difference to your business, and then focus on those killer ideas that are going to really focus where to do it. And that means that, in theory, you can build the business case and everything behind it. So the next kind of stage, though, that we also encourage is coming up with not just ideas, but also some policies of when and won't you use Gen AI, what kind of data you're prepared to put through these models. Now, I showed you a very secure architecture, but it still comes down to you'll have confidential information in your business, PPI data in your business, maybe PCI data in your business, confidential data, intellectual data. So what we'd recommend is categorising all the ways you potentially could use Gen AI and all those different kinds of data and interactions, and then coming up with a policy so that the people inside your business knows where you can use Gen AI. An example is if you like using Code Whisperer, one of your policy may be is that you can use Code Whisperer to write the code, but not the tests. So therefore, a human writes the test. So you've brought a balance into your into the system. Okay, and that's that human in the loop balance. So we see that kind of thing set out in the policy, and then it's about taking the ideas, scoring those ideas. So you want to understand the potential value that can do to your business or what you're trying to achieve with Gen AI versus the complexity. And it can be the complexity of implementation, or maybe the complexity around accessing the right data at the right time. There may be a data silo that you still need to break down. Maybe there's some constraints around the data you're trying to access. So we'd recommend looking at those kind of things to rate the complexity. And then once you have those scores, you select those top killer ideas and then start one killer proof of concept around that. And I'll go through that in a bit more. But then build out a roadmap of how you're going to deliver that over the next period of time. Because one of the challenges we've been seeing in this crazy year that we've had is everybody's got into ChatGPT, etc. Everyone wants to play these ideas and they're bubbling up, but you do need some sort of strategy of when and how you're going to do them, because you're going to have an adoption problem later on. So make sure that you have a plan of the most important cases, when to bring them along, and also how that works with your policy. And then the next stage is then, so you've got your kind of your strategy, you know what you're doing, you've got your roadmap, and then it's about actually implementing it. So where we kind of encourage, the next step is putting some of those essential controls down, and I showed you some of those in the kind of the technical architecture, and there may be other things that you need to put down inside the organisation, and put the kind of the essential ones you need. You might not, for your first use case, you might not need all the controls, so there's a balance to be had there, but put those controls in place so that they're there safeguarding you, so that you know your data's not going to leak, etc. And then take that use case, and that first use case, and really explore it, discover it, look at the data. Have you got the right data in the right place, the right formats? Has it been, do you need to clean it up a bit more? Do you need to bring other data in to add to it so that you've got more information available? And where we really focus on is the business case. So you've got a killer idea, you've got the value, but you really need to develop up and bubble up that business case. What's the return on investment? If it's going to take you 3 months to get it to production, you want to make sure that you're going to get the reward. If it's going to take a few weeks, the equation is slightly different. So you need to really focus on that business case. And if it's not there, don't do it. Don't proceed. You've got to make sure you then focus on something that can be delivered. So this is very much an iterative cycle of making sure you pick the right use case, looking at its feasibility, and then building out the business case, because you want to do is the business wants to see the adoption at the end of the day. And then kind of prove it, okay? So create a proof of concept, using some of our architecture or your own, but create that initial proof of concept, show what's possible. Now, there's nothing wrong, in my opinion, of knocking something together in Streamlit and LangChain for about half an hour to show something. But again, it's about showing to the business the potential of the use case in a format they can understand. So really do do that. Maybe explore some of the different models available to you so that you can really focus down to see if it's going well, and really prove that value. And ideally, you'd have some sort of pilots, you'd have some sort of criteria that you're mixing against so that you know that it's a winner, basically. Or if it's not, you can focus your efforts, but you haven't invested 6-9 months at that point of getting from A to B. And then there's the kind of embedding phase, and that takes a little bit longer, but that's about creating that MVP and actually getting into the business and integrated into a business process, and doing that first real pilot with customers and getting them to use it. And you'll learn a lot more getting to that stage than you did in the previous stages based on our client experience. But maybe don't focus too much about all of the automation and all of the quality that you need to just do enough. Some of the kind of the language, LNO ops and some of that can come a bit later, but make sure that you kind of deliver that into the real world. And then once you've got that main kind of use case available in production, being used, then it's about adoption and scaling it. So starting off another one or starting off the next iteration. Hopefully by that point you've established that cadence inside your business and you can drive the transformation. And maybe one of the things Nick will talk about is these challenges that they've ramped up and inspired their business so much that they want to do more, quicker. So it's good to get to that stage, but you really want to get that adoption going at scale. So, why Cognizant? Okay, so we feel that we've got one of the most compelling offerings to our clients in the market. Okay, we have wide industry knowledge. We have specialist SMEs in most industries that can help you create those ideas, create those use cases, understand where you're going and where your business is going, and the challenge actually is to think where the business is going to be in 5 years and building the use case that's going to really nail it in 5 years, or transform your business to get there in 5 years, not necessarily today's problems. So our experience in multiple industries can help you with that. And then there's governance and responsibility, and Naveen touched on it. Again, the same thing's happening in the UK. There is government summits, that kind of thing, to work on this policy. So regulation is going to happen. And regulation is already there. So if you think about it, there's GDPR issues in the UK. There's the similar kind of data control and privacy issues of individuals over here. So it's understanding another SMEs that understand that. And for example, the EU is going to bring out AI law very soon about if a model has a impact on an individual, that you have to really have that traceability and that auditability of the system. So we've got experts that understand those regulations and their applicability in different markets that can help you. And again, so that do technical expertise. I really think the skill actually in Gen AI is going to come down to the prompt engineer, and they're going to have to know how to use the model really well. They're going to have to understand the business context even more. If you can harness that bit, then that's going to be the killer. So we have experts in those areas that can work with our industry experts at creating great prompts that really do drive through that. And using the architecture, we think we've got a mature way of taking things from that pilot and all the way to an MVP in production that's nice and secure. The other thing we can help with is you maybe want to launch a product Okay, so I honestly think that's where most of the creativity is going to come in the next few years. Is there's going to be new products launched generally to the general market, and they're going to be a Gen AI base, but the killer ones, and we actually kind of learned that from ChatGPT, is the user interface, the simplicity of the user journey, the feedback in that process, that's what makes it tactile to the user. And if you compare it to things like the internet and when that came along, it's when you had search engines and all that stuff into the home where the adoption ramped up. So it's really going to, I think we're going to focus more on the experience than actually necessarily the technology in the next few years as we move on. But for us, it still comes down to right now, is the business ready? Is your business ready? Is your opportunity ready? And critical that process is us understanding how your business operates. You might have to go through a change management process to change the way your business functions to be able to exploit where Gen AI is going to take your business. So you're going to have to take your people on the journey as well. So we can help you with that organizational change management piece. And what we can also do is just look at the readiness. I often, if you're not ready to actually start in the Gen AI journey right now, we can look at things to help you prepare for it. So make sure you've got your cloud foundations in place, your cloud strategy in place, and then also your data strategy. Have you got data strategy? Have you got a data foundation? Because guess what? If you're going to use all this data, you're going to have to store it somewhere. It's going to have governance controls, especially if you're in regulated markets, that kind of thing. So you're going to have to focus a lot more about that. So I always say focus on the foundation as well, because then you're prepared for what will come next in a few years' time. So that's enough for me. I'm going to hand over to our client Nick from Williams Lee, CTO at Williams Lee. He's just going to talk about how they went on that journey with us.
Thanks, Phil. Thank you. Afternoon, everybody. So firstly, thank you to Cognizant for inviting me here to tell you a little bit around our story and how we mobilized our enterprise to adopt generative AI. Before I do that, I'm going to give you a little bit of context around Williams Lee. Then what I will do is I'll take you through our journey, so how we mobilized our business, drove excitement, generated the ideas, and then I'll take you through how that then transpired with what were our challenges, our outcomes, and the lessons that we learned. So, who is Williams Lee? So, Williams Lee are a business process outsourcing organization. We focus on 3 sectors. So we focus on the legal sector, the financial services sector, predominantly investment banking, and the consultancy sector. All predominantly regulated environments where data is highly sensitive and that you have to have strict governance around who sees what, which interestingly makes training models quite difficult as well. We have around about 7,000 employees, and we essentially cover the globe. So we have business in the US. We have a business in EMEA and in APAC, and we have our operational centers in India as well. And what we do, we offer our clients relatively flexible, or very flexible, operating models. So we can work on-site, we work onshore. So we've got 2 sites in the US, Wheeling, West Virginia, Columbus, Ohio, and we've got a site in Leeds in the UK. And then we offer offshore services as well with 3 sites in India. And what we do for our clients, like I say, we're business process outsourcing, but we have highly skilled knowledge workers working on things like merger acquisition, research, pitch books for investment banking firms, document processing, proofreading, transcription for the legal sector. And how this all really started was we have a track record of deploying technology into this sector. We're an AWS shop predominantly, so we have essentially a proprietary service management tool, manages all our workflow globally, and it manages our workforce. That's our Engage platform. It's fully hosted in AWS. It's got a data warehouse. We utilize Redshift, and all our data visualization, dashboards, reporting comes off that. And we've also digitized our intelligent document processing capability using things like text extract and comprehend. So we've got a capability of deploying technology in regulated environments to ultimately drive productivity, efficiency, and value to our clients. What we didn't have, however, we didn't have any generative AI capability. And go back to 30th November, probably very few people did. So this is now how we sort of mobilized our business to go on that journey. So I'll take you through these steps in a little bit more detail, but ultimately we had a mild panic and then we started with what is our AI vision. Part of that was, again, mobilizing our organization. So we're an organization of 7,000 employees. Who knows best what our client needs are the people that work with our clients every single day. So we wanted to really engage with every single employee about how can we utilize this great technology to drive value. We then formed what we just called our POC team. So this was a relatively small but highly empowered, very highly sponsored team that can then work with those SMEs and ultimately deliver proof of concepts really quickly, fail fast, or move on. So we established this very nimble decision-making process. And one of the keys to that was actually picking the right partner. Picking the right partner that could help us go on that journey and worked in a very similar method to what we did. So our vision was, it was interesting really, it was quite broad. It was, we know large language models and Gen AI will disrupt our business. It wasn't really in doubt. Question was how quick? And we wanted to be right at the beginning of that. We wanted to understand how it could disrupt our business, how we can use that as an opportunity, and how it can drive further growth and value for our clients and ultimately for our business. So we wanted to embed AI, large language models, in all our core service offerings. We then wanted to understand how that would impact us, so where can we drive new revenue streams, so really take the upside of this and minimize the downside. And therefore it says, so where do we focus? What technologies and and do we buy, do we build, do we partner? So it was a relatively broad AI vision. Nothing was off the table. So I suppose phase one really was all about educate and excite our business. So first thing we did, 1st of December quite possibly, was we sat down with our CISO and we said we have to make this available to all our employees. So I know a lot of organizations, especially in regulated environments, sort of restrict that capability, but our view was let's get a really simple policy that everybody can understand and let's encourage the use of it, but in the right way. So we set the policy, we set the rationale and the reasons for how and when you can use this. And then we just fed it into every communication, all our monthly sort of updates with the CEO, all had what we were doing on our Gen AI. And one of the good things that really sort of engaged the whole population is we launched a contest. It was called Aim for the Stars. And it was really crowdsourcing these ideas for how can we utilize generative AI to ultimately drive value into our clients and into Williams Lee. So we ran this for about 6 weeks. We got a significant input from all levels of the business and some really, really good findings. We found people that had never touched a line of code in their life. They used ChatGPT and they actually built a working tool in things like macro bars and those sorts of things. And we really drove that and we put real money on the table. We said there's going to be money for the top 3, and if your product makes it to production and ultimately goes out to a client, then they'd get a further share of that value. So we ended up with all these really good ideas. And then it was ultimately, how do we filter through that? And then, like I say, as part of that, we created this small cross-functional team that had, we sat every 2 weeks, and we still do. It's got the chief exec on that POC team, and ultimately we update, we make decisions, and we stop programs, and we approve investment. And it's a really agile way of just keeping the momentum going, because a lot of this was about pace. So what were some of the POC team principles? So firstly is, whatever we do, it has to work in the real world. With limited time, limited budget, yes, things won't make it past prototype or POC or MVP. But ultimately, you want to maximize the percentage of that happening. So it was really about sitting down with our clients and understanding where are their pain points, where can we invest to create these capabilities. And then it was about focus. So really, you can't handle, certainly a business of our size can't handle more than 3 to 5 ideas at any one time. So we really wanted to focus. We got loads of great ideas, but it was really about focusing on the first tranche and then moving on. And I did hear a good quote, actually. I think it was a Steve Jobs one that says, focus is easy if all you're cutting are things that you don't care about. But if you've got an idea that you care deeply about and you cut that because there's a better priority, then that's true focus. So we had lots of ideas that a lot of people were bought into, but we had to focus on a few. So then making those early decisions, and importantly, using data to drive those decisions as well. So, understanding what would the ROI be? What's the market share for this? What price point can we charge for it? What is ultimately the business plan around some of that? And one of the, I'll come on to this a little bit later, but one of the reasons why we chose Inner Wisdom and Cognizant was their process to get you from idea to what we call proof of value. And in that proof of value, you have a working prototype. You have ultimately an ROI model. So you start talking, okay, so what are the costs of running this on our AWS environment? What support structures do we need behind it? What price point will it be? How quickly can we get clients to adopt this? And ultimately, what does the revenue look like over 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? And we can achieve all of that in 8 weeks. And having something where you've got a demonstrable model with a business case, and ideally with 2 or 3 clients that are bought into it, is really, really powerful when you start making investment decisions with your investment committee. So that was one of the reasons that we actually went with Inner Wisdom, because that process, that rapid prototyping business case model, was we found really, really valuable. Obviously, as part of this, you need to get your stakeholders bought in. So if you're doing operational efficiency, get ops bought in. If you're trying to sell a new service line, get the sales team bought in. Because there's no point creating these technologies if the people that are ultimately having to put their energy behind this don't believe in it. So this cross-functional team that we created, it had sales, it had marketing, it had ops, it had finance, and obviously technology. And ultimately, it was about getting the energy of the business around these handful of focused new capabilities. And then it was all about setting a baseline, so understand where are we today, and then as we launch, continually mapping those benefits, and ultimately then go back into product lifecycle management then. So you're then into listing clients, new features, and driving forward. So we feel that small, agile team was really successful. We've churned a number of ideas now, a number of actual live products that are out in the market through that process. Key part is obviously celebrate quick wins. A lot of people are putting a lot of energy into this, and actually it's quite tough. Creating a new product is really hard. So celebrate your quick wins. Over-communicate all your progress and results, because people don't hear it first time, and everybody's busy in a corporate world. If you're going to fail, fail quickly. Pretty common sense, really. And don't be afraid to change direction. So, and the other one is get people to focus on what their strengths are. So we've got some really good subject matter experts that understand the legal sector, understand investment banking, understand our workloads, but might not understand generative AI or vector databases, large language models. So, you know, bring in the specialism as you need it. And then what are some of the challenges? And I would say that these challenges continue today. So finding the right use case is really difficult again. So yes, we've launched a couple of products, but finding the right use case that's the sort of silver bullet that we need. You know, that's the secret sauce, because if you can find the right use case that's going to get adoption, that is deliverable and will drive value, then ultimately it will succeed. The other thing, and I think that's why there's so many people in events like this, is getting access to the technical know-how. So I don't know how many new announcements there have been this week, but trying to keep up with technology, trying to keep up with how do we architect these things, what are the best models to use, is changing daily. And I have I suppose the benefit of having a very, very engaged chief executive. So I get pinged by emails, have you heard this announcement? Are we using this model? And it's great because we've got massive engagement, but actually as a technologist, keeping up with technology that is scalable and secure and will get signed off is a challenge. And having people that are naturally inquisitive and willing to experiment, is frankly, there's just not enough of them. Speed to market. Again, about getting that concept of a minimum viable product, get it out to market quick, get the feedback, and then drive the roadmap. So speed to market is always a challenge. Resource availability comes back down to focus. So there is always more demand than supply in any function. And this isn't just about the technical resources now, but if we are building a capability for our document processing teams, and they're 90% utilized across client work, you're not going to get them on a project. So it has to be an entire business decision that you're going to prioritize these projects. And then client adoption understanding. The markets we work in don't historically move fast. So to get client adoption, if we can get an anchor client, get people to really start to be that pilot client and shape the roadmap from very, very early doors, then you're more likely to get client adoption. Once you've got one, you've got a case study, you can then drive that forward. And then ultimately, for us, the commercials can be a challenge. So historically, business process outsourcing, charged by the FTE, charged by the hour, implement automation, artificial intelligence. All of a sudden, I can do things in minutes that used to take me hours, but I charge by the hour. So we, as an organisation, and a lot of BPOs and services organisations having the same challenge, is how do we transform our commercial model alongside transforming our operational model, alongside introducing new technology. So there's a lot of change all to take on there. But it's doable. So I mentioned we partnered with Inner Wisdom to build a number of our MVPs. And I think the key thing that really sealed the deal for us was this, the framework of moving to proof of value really quickly. The same old adage, time kills deals. Yeah, well, times kill projects as well. The faster you can get stuff in people's hands, the more chance you've got of really getting things off the ground. So having that 8-week program to go from idea to a working prototype with a business case and a commercial model I cannot overestimate how valuable that is to go to an investment committee and demonstrate something. Obviously, AI expertise. It will continue to be a bottleneck. And the cultural alignment, really. We do work in a fast-paced environment. We are agile. You have to sort of roll with the punches from time to time, and you need a partner that will do that with you. So what was the outcome, I hear you all ask? So we've actually launched 6 new capabilities in the last 18 months, so one every 3 months. We feel that's pretty good for an organisation of our size, especially in the markets that we work in. We've got a further 4 that will be released very, very early next year, and actually it says Q4 2023. We're in pilot stage now with 2 clients on one particular product. So it'll go general availability in January. We do have a very healthy pipeline of new services. And I suppose the challenge here is getting all these ideas in, especially when you're crowdsourcing from your organization, and keeping their engagement and motivation when you know you can't deliver everything. And that is a real challenge for an organization. I'm not sure we've overcome that, but we've got lots of ideas and we try to keep people fully engaged. Obviously, we've got things like increased operational efficiency. We do have new revenue streams that are tech-enabled, away from the old commercial model, that are now bringing in value to Williams Lee. And the other thing is actually changing the perception of Williams Lee from a human capital BPO business to a tech organisation, and then ultimately increased profit margin. So they were the outcomes. There's still a long, long way to go, and like I say, we've got a good foundation. So I'll skip through these because I think I covered a lot of these in the outcomes thinking about it, but make it a priority. And that has to be across the entire business. Not one part of the organisation can do this alone. Those cross-functional teams are critical. Again, it really drives ownership in every single function to get these things off the ground, and that cannot be underestimated. Partner with specialists, goes without saying, it's a minefield, an absolute minefield of what to use, when to use it, how to keep it secure, all those sorts of things. I'd say empower the team, but also limit the size of those teams, really empower those people to make the decisions, and don't make decisions by committee. Use data. We're quite lucky, we've got quite a good sort of data foundation, data and governance, so our metrics are very clean and we can make decisions on that. And ultimately, these frequent check-ins, and keep clients at the centre of everything. And I think that's been a Williams Lee ethos for a long, long time, is that the client's at the centre of everything that we do. And if you do that, then you're more likely to succeed. So that was sort of, I suppose, the Gen AI Williams Lee story so far, ... There's a lot further to go. And with that, I'm going to invite Phil and Naveen. Am I? Back up? Oh, just Phil. There you go.
Yeah, thank you.
And say thank you.
For coming and telling about our joint successes together. We will be available 5-10 minutes outside for any follow-up questions. But thank you all very much for attending our session.
Thank you.